first mistake the Galactic Confederation made was assuming humans would follow established first contact protocols. Admiral Veltara, commanding officer of the exploration vessel Eternal Harmony, had overseen 47 successful first contact missions across her 200-year career. Each had followed the same predictable pattern: initial confusion, defensive posturing, gradual communication establishment, cultural exchange, and finally integration into galactic society. Earth should have been contact number 48. The Eternal Harmony dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system on what humans would later remember as October 15, 2157. The massive ship, 3 kilometers of gleaming biometal and crystalline observation decks, took position near Jupiter's largest moon. Standard protocol dictated a careful approach, monitoring the planet's communications, studying their technology level, and preparing a gentle introduction to galactic civilization. Dr. A. Halen Force, the Confederation's leading xenopsychologist, had spent months studying intercepted human transmissions. His analysis painted a picture of a species that was curious but cautious, technologically advanced but still bound to their single world, aggressive in their entertainment but generally peaceful in their daily interactions. The psychological profile suggested humans would require approximately 6 months of careful contact before they would be ready for formal diplomatic relations. That assessment lasted exactly 14 hours. Captain Sarah Chen of the Earth Defense Force cruiser Defiance had been conducting routine patrol sweeps of the outer system when her ship's long-range sensors detected the alien vessel. Unlike every other species the Confederation had encountered, humans didn't spend days or weeks observing and analyzing the foreign ship. Chen's first transmission to Earth Command was brief and to the point. Unknown vessel detected. Possibly hostile. Requesting permission to investigate. Permission was granted immediately. Admiral Veltara watched in growing confusion as the primitive human ship accelerated toward their position at speeds that should have turned its occupants into biological paste. According to their analysis, human vessels shouldn't possess the inertial dampening technology necessary for such maneuvers. Yet somehow, impossibly, the ship maintained acceleration rates that would have killed any other known species. Perhaps their biology is more resilient than our initial scans suggested Dr. Force, his scaled hands dancing across holographic displays. Many species have adapted to higher gravitational forces than expected. The Confederation ship began broadcasting standard greeting protocols on all frequencies, transmitting mathematical concepts, artistic representations, and peaceful intentions in 17 different formats. They expected the human vessel to slow, perhaps return similar signals, and begin the careful dance of first contact. Instead, Captain Chen opened a direct communication channel and spoke in perfect galactic standard. Alien vessel, this is Captain Sarah Chen of the Earth Defense Force ship Defiance. State your intentions in this system immediately, or we will consider you a hostile force. The bridge of the Eternal Harmony fell silent. In 200 years of exploration, Admiral Veltara had never encountered a species that demanded explanations from them during first contact. More disturbing still was the fact that this human had somehow learned their language without any prior communication. Admiral, whispered Communications Officer Renth, his tentacles quivering with anxiety. How could they possibly know galactic standard? Our intelligence suggests they've never encountered another spacefaring species. Doctor, Force was already running analysis algorithms, his expression growing more confused by the second. Their linguistic adaptation rate is unprecedented. They appear to have decoded our greeting transmissions and extrapolated a complete understanding of our language structure in less than 30 minutes. Admiral Veltara composed herself and responded according to protocol. Greetings, humans of Earth. We are representatives of the Galactic Confederation, an alliance of peaceful species. We come seeking friendship and cultural exchange. Captain Chen's response came without hesitation. Prove it. I beg your pardon? Prove you're peaceful. Your ship is 3 kilometers long and broadcasting on frequencies that interfere with our navigation systems. You've positioned yourself near our shipping lanes without permission, and you've been scanning our planet for the past day. Where I come from, that's called reconnaissance for invasion. Dr. Force frantically consulted his behavioral analysis charts. According to every predictive model, species at humanity's technological level should be overwhelmed by the implications of first contact, not making tactical assessments and demands. Admiral, I recommend we maintain diplomatic protocols. Their aggressive response is likely a defense mechanism born from confusion and fear. But Admiral Veltara was beginning to suspect this wasn't fear at all. She had dealt with frightened species before, and their responses were typically either complete withdrawal or frantic attempts at communication. Captain Chen's voice carried no tremor of fear, no uncertainty. If anything, she sounded impatient. Captain Chen, the Admiral continued, we understand your caution. Perhaps you would permit a small diplomatic shuttle to approach your vessel for peaceful talks. Negative. You want to talk, we'll do it right here, right now. You've got 10 minutes to explain what you want and why we shouldn't blow you out of our sky. The casual mention of violence sent ripples of shock through the Confederation bridge crew. Most species required weeks or months to even consider the possibility of attacking a vastly superior alien vessel. Humans were apparently ready to start shooting within hours of first contact. Captain, Admiral Veltara said carefully, we mean no harm. Our vessel is equipped with defensive systems only. Your defensive systems are reading as weapons capable of glassing our entire planet, Chen replied matter-of-factly. So let me be clear. You have 9 minutes to convince me you're actually peaceful before I decide you're too dangerous to let live. Dr. Force was now frantically updating his psychological profiles, throwing out decades of established Xenop psychological theory. Admiral, their behavioral patterns don't match any known framework. They appear to be treating a first contact situation as a potential military engagement. That's because it is a potential military engagement, Admiral Veltara murmured, a cold realization creeping up her spine. She had studied enough history to recognize the signs. Humans weren't behaving like a primitive species encountering advanced aliens. They were behaving like soldiers evaluating a threat. The next 8 minutes of conversation revealed just how deeply the Confederation had misunderstood humanity. Captain Chen asked detailed questions about Confederation technology, military capabilities, territorial boundaries, and defensive protocols. She wanted to know about other species' aggression levels, historical conflicts, and the location of the nearest Confederation military installations. When Admiral Veltara asked why these questions were necessary for peaceful first contact, Chen's answer was chillingly simple. Because if you're lying about being peaceful, I need to know how to kill you. And if you're telling the truth about being peaceful, I need to know how to kill whoever might threaten you later. Dr. Force deleted his entire analysis of human psychology and started over from scratch. Everything they had assumed about this species was wrong. Humans didn't see first contact as a momentous occasion requiring careful cultural exchange. They saw it as the first day of either friendship or war, and they were already preparing for both possibilities. Admiral, Captain Chen's voice came through the speakers one final time, I'm transmitting coordinates to a military station in Earth orbit. You're welcome to send a single diplomatic shuttle with no more than 5 occupants. They'll be met by a negotiation team, scanned for weapons, and escorted to talks. Any deviation from these instructions will be interpreted as a hostile act. Admiral Veltara found herself agreeing to terms dictated by a species that had learned of alien existence less than a day ago. As she watched the human vessel take up an aggressive patrol pattern around their ship, she made a note in her log that would later be studied by military academies across the galaxy. First contact with humans successful. Species exhibits unprecedented tactical adaptability and aggressive defensive posturing. Recommend extreme caution in future interactions. Preliminary assessment, do not make these beings angry. It was the most accurate first contact report in Confederation history. It was also completely ignored by the military planners who would soon decide that humanity needed to be conquered before they became a threat to galactic stability. That decision would prove to be the Confederation's second mistake. Their third mistake would be thinking they could win. The Shuffle Bay of Station Alpha 7 was a study in controlled tension. Admiral Veltara had arrived with exactly 5 diplomats as requested, and each had submitted to extensive scanning without complaint. What surprised her was the casual efficiency of the human security procedures. The scanning equipment was primitive by Confederation standards, but the operators used it with the precision of people who performed these checks regularly. This isn't your first time dealing with potentially hostile visitors, she observed to Colonel James Harrison, the human military liaison assigned to the talks. Harrison's smile was polite, but didn't reach his eyes. Ma'am, in human history, every first meeting between different groups has the potential to go sideways. We've learned to prepare accordingly. The negotiation room was Spartan and functional, with built-in recording equipment and what Admiral Veltara recognized as high-end surveillance systems. More interesting were the subtle defensive positions built into the room's architecture. Cover points, emergency exits, and what appeared to be concealed weapon emplacements.
Colonel Harrison, she began, your species seems remarkably prepared for the possibility of hostile alien contact.
We've been listening to space for over a century, Harrison replied. We knew someone would show up eventually. Our job was to make sure we'd be ready when they did. Doctor, Force leaned forward with scientific curiosity. Ready for what, specifically? For anything, Harrison answered simply. The formal negotiations began with standard Confederation protocols, cultural exchanges, technology sharing agreements, gradual integration timelines. The human responses consistently deviated from expected patterns. Where other species typically showed wonder at galactic technology, humans wanted detailed specifications. Where other species requested time to adapt to new concepts, humans immediately began calculating applications and implications. You're faster than light communication systems, said Dr. Elizabeth Warren, humanity's lead scientist in the negotiations. What's the range limitation and how vulnerable are they to interference?
Dr. Wave.
Force blinked in confusion. These are rather advanced technical questions for a species just learning about galactic civilization. We're engineers, Dr. Warren replied matter-of-factly. We see a new technology. We want to understand how it works, how it can be improved, and how it can fail. Admiral Veltara was beginning to understand that humans approached everything like engineers. They didn't just want to join galactic civilization, they wanted to understand it completely, improve upon it, and prepare for its potential weaknesses. Perhaps, she suggested diplomatically, we should focus on establishing basic diplomatic relations before discussing complex technological exchanges. Colonel Harrison and Dr. Warren exchanged a look that Admiral Veltara was learning to recognize as human communication. It was the same look Captain Chen had shared with her crew before, making demands of a vastly superior alien vessel. Admiral? Colonel Harrison said carefully, we appreciate your peaceful intentions, but we need to be clear about something. Humans don't do anything halfway. If we're joining your galactic community, we're going to be full partners, not junior members waiting to be educated. We'll learn everything there is to know about galactic technology, politics, and military capabilities. We'll contribute everything we can to improve galactic civilization, and we'll be ready to defend it against any threat. That's quite an ambitious approach for a species just entering galactic society, Admiral Veltara replied. It's the only approach we know, Dr. Ignatius, Warren added. Our history is full of civilizations that fell because they weren't prepared for change. We've learned to adapt fast or die. Doctor, Force was scribbling notes frantically, trying to understand a species that treated first contact like a job interview rather than a cultural revolution. Dr. Warren, don't your people need time to adjust to the knowledge that they're not alone in the universe? Dr. Warren looked genuinely puzzled by the question. Why would we need time to adjust? We've known, statistically, that alien life was probable for over 2 centuries. The only surprise is that you're so similar to us biologically. We expected more exotic biochemistries. Admiral Veltara realized that humans had been mentally preparing for alien contact since before they achieved spaceflight. While other species were shocked by the discovery of galactic civilization, humans had been planning for it. What exactly do you want from this relationship? She asked directly. Colonel Harrison's answer would be recorded and analyzed by xenopsychologists for decades. We want to be the kind of partners you can count on when everything goes to hell. Because sooner or later, everything always goes to hell. And when it does, you want humans on your side. It was both a promise and a warning. The Confederation just didn't recognize it as the latter until it was far too late. 6 months after first contact, the Galactic Confederation Council convened an emergency session on the neutral world of Nexus Prime. The topic was humanity, and the mood was decidedly uneasy. Chancellor Vexra, a crystalline being whose species had helped found the Confederation 800 years earlier, called the session to order with uncharacteristic bluntness. We need to discuss the human problem. Around the circular chamber, representatives from 43 species shifted uncomfortably. In the short time since Earth's integration into galactic society, humans had managed to make every other species nervous. Admiral Corrin of the Thexian Empire was the first to speak. His warrior species had dominated galactic military doctrine for 3 centuries, but his voice carried notes of uncertainty that hadn't been heard since the Confederation's founding. My lords, I must report that human military observers have been unsettling. Unsettling how? Asked Ambassador Yilneth, her telepathic species typically more concerned with emotional harmony than military matters. Admiral Corrin activated a holographic display showing tactical analysis charts. We invited human observers to our annual war games, as per standard protocol for new member species. They were supposed to learn from our established military doctrines.
The hologram shifted to show footage of human military personnel taking notes during Confederation fleet exercises.
Instead, Admiral Corrin continued, they spent the entire exercise identifying weaknesses in our formations, vulnerabilities in our ship designs, and flaws in our tactical assumptions. Worse, they were correct about all of them. General Krekstar of the Moloch warrior clans leaned forward with interest. His species had a reputation for military prowess that had gone unchallenged for generations. Surely you exaggerate, Admiral. No species masters military science in mere months. Admiral Corrin's expression was grim. General, I invite you to review the human tactical assessments yourself. In 6 months, they identified 17 critical vulnerabilities in our defensive doctrine that our own strategists had missed for decades. They've proposed modifications to our fleet formations that increase effectiveness by 37%, and they've asked questions about our military capabilities that suggest they're already thinking several steps ahead of current galactic threats. Chancellor Vexra's crystalline form flickered with concern. Questions such as, they wanted to know how our fleets would respond to simultaneous attacks on multiple fronts. They asked about our capacity for rapid deployment across galactic distances. They inquired about our experience fighting enemies who don't follow conventional military doctrines. Admiral Corrin paused meaningfully. They specifically asked about our contingency plans for fighting enemies who refused to surrender. The chamber fell silent. In 800 years of galactic history, no species had ever refused to surrender when faced with overwhelming force. It was a concept that existed only in theoretical military studies. Helmry, the Confederation's chief xenobiologist, added her own disturbing observations. My research team has been studying human physiology and psychology since first contact. Our findings are unprecedented. She activated her own holographic display showing biological scans and psychological profiles. Humans possess several adaptations that we initially misunderstood. Their adrenaline response system, for instance, doesn't just provide temporary enhancement during stress. It allows them to function beyond normal biological limits for extended periods. How extended? Asked Ambassador Yilnath. We documented cases during their military exercises where human soldiers maintained peak performance for over 36 hours without rest. Their pain tolerance during this state approaches levels that would indicate complete nervous system failure in most species. Yet they remain conscious, alert, and tactically effective. General Krekstar scoffed. Impressive perhaps, but hardly unprecedented. My own warriors can fight for days without rest. Dr. Helmry's response was quiet but chilling. General, your warriors eventually require rest and recuperation. Humans in combat conditions appear capable of pushing beyond those limits indefinitely. We have historical records from their own databases of human soldiers fighting effectively while suffering injuries that should have rendered them unconscious or dead. She highlighted specific examples from human military history. During the Second World War, human soldiers continued fighting with multiple bullet wounds, broken bones, and blood loss that would have killed most galactic species. In their more recent conflicts, we have documented cases of humans completing military objectives while technically dying from their injuries.
The silence stretched uncomfortably long.
Finally, Chancellor Vexra spoke. Dr. Helmry, are you suggesting that humans can fight while biologically dead? I'm suggesting that human definitions of dead and unable to fight don't necessarily overlap, she replied. Their neurological systems maintain function under conditions that would cause complete shutdown in any other known species.
Ambassador Lorth of the Peaceful Assembly raised a tentacle nervously.
Surely their psychological profiles indicate normal stress responses to combat? Most species develop aversion to violence after experiencing it.
Doctor.
Helmry's expression became even more troubled. Ambassador, that's perhaps the most disturbing aspect of our findings. Humans don't develop combat aversion, they develop combat effectiveness. Exposure to violence doesn't traumatize them into avoidance, it trains them to be more efficient at violence. She displayed psychological assessment charts. Every other species shows decreased aggression and increased caution after experiencing combat. Humans show the opposite pattern. They become more tactically sophisticated, more emotionally detached from violence, and more capable of sustained aggression. General Krekstar was no longer scoffing.
Are you saying they get better at killing the more they kill? That's exactly what I'm saying, General. And unlike your warrior species, which channels aggression into ritual combat and formal challenges, humans appear capable of applying learned violence to any situation they perceive as threatening.
Admiral Corrin added his own observations. During joint training exercises, Human military personnel have consistently outperformed our elite units. Not through superior technology or physical attributes, but through tactical adaptability. They don't just learn our combat doctrines, they improve them in real time. Moreover, he continued, they've begun developing entirely new tactical approaches based on their unique physiological capabilities. They call it Sustained Engagement Doctrine, and it's based on the assumption that human forces can maintain combat effectiveness long after other species would be forced to withdraw. Chancellor Vexra's form flickered more rapidly, indicating significant distress. What kind of tactical approaches? Admiral Corrin hesitated before answering. They're developing battle plans based on the assumption that their soldiers will continue fighting even after sustaining what we would consider fatal injuries. They call it acceptable loss calculus, and it allows for tactical decisions that no other species could survive implementing. Ambassador Yilneth's empathic abilities were picking up the emotional undercurrents in the room, and what she sensed was fear. My lords, I must point out that humans have shown no aggressive intent toward any Confederation species. Their behavior, while unusual, has been consistently cooperative. Dr. Henry nodded reluctantly. That's true, Ambassador, but it's worth noting that human cooperation appears to be a strategic choice rather than a natural inclination. They've been studying our political structures, military capabilities, and economic systems with the same intensity they apply to everything else. She brought up intelligence reports that made several ambassadors gasp. Human information gathering operations since joining the Confederation have been comprehensive. They've mapped our supply lines, analyzed our communication protocols, and compiled detailed assessments of every member species' military and industrial capabilities. That sounds like espionage, General Krextar growled. Technically, it's all information that was freely available through normal diplomatic channels, Dr. Helmry replied. Humans simply gathered and analyzed it more thoroughly than any previous species. The disturbing part is how quickly they did it, and what they're doing with the information. Chancellor Vexra leaned forward. What are they doing with it? They're building contingency plans, Admiral Corrin answered. Our intelligence suggests that Earth's military command has developed response scenarios for virtually every possible threat to Confederation space. They've wargamed conflicts with species we consider peaceful allies, developed countermeasures for weapons systems that exist only in theoretical research, and created deployment strategies for threats that haven't been seen for centuries. They're preparing for wars that don't exist, Dr. Helmry added, quietly. And they're doing it with the assumption that they'll be the ones fighting those wars. The implication settled over the chamber like a heavy weight. Ambassador Lorth spoke what many were thinking. Are we suggesting that humans are naturally warlike? No, Dr. Henry replied. That's what makes them so disturbing. They're not warlike in the sense that they seek conflict. They're warlike in the sense that they assume conflict is inevitable and prepare accordingly. They've built their entire civilization around the assumption that they'll eventually have to fight for survival. General Krextar stood slowly, his massive frame casting shadows across the chamber. My lords, I've commanded warrior fleets for 4 decades. I've faced the most aggressive species in the galaxy. But I've never encountered anything like humans. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Other aggressive species fight until they win or lose. Humans fight until the threat is eliminated. That's not the same thing. Chancellor Vexra's crystalline form had stopped flickering entirely, indicating deep contemplation. General, in your professional opinion, do humans represent a threat to Confederation stability? The general's answer would later be quoted in military academies across the galaxy. Chancellor, humans represent a threat to anyone who threatens them. The question we need to ask ourselves is, do we want to be their friends or their enemies? Because I strongly suspect those are the only 2 options they recognize. As the emergency session continued into the night, one fact became increasingly clear. The Galactic Confederation had never encountered anything like humanity. They were a species that approached peace with the same ruthless efficiency they applied to war, and they were preparing for conflicts that might not happen for centuries. The debate that night would continue for weeks, but the fundamental question had been established. What do you do with allies who are potentially more dangerous than your enemies? Some council members argued for continued cooperation and integration, believing that human capabilities could be channeled toward galactic defense. Others worried that humanity's aggressive preparation for hypothetical conflicts made them a destabilizing influence. But in the end, it was General Krextar who posed the question that would shape future policy. My lords, has anyone considered what happens if we try to tell humans they're too dangerous to be our allies? The uncomfortable silence that followed suggested that, for the first time in Confederation history, They were dealing with a species that might be too dangerous to be their enemies. The final decision came not from the Confederation Council, but from the shadows of galactic politics where the real power had always resided. The hegemony, a coalition of the 5 most powerful species in the galaxy, met in complete secrecy on the dead world of Keth Prime. No recordings were made, no official minutes taken, and no formal votes cast, but the outcome would reshape the galaxy. High Regent Velthara of the Borthan Empire spoke for the group, her words measured and final. Humanity has become an unacceptable variable in galactic stability. They learn too fast, prepare too thoroughly, and refuse to accept limitations that other species consider natural law. Around the obsidian table, the other hegemony leaders nodded in agreement. General Torvex of the Keth Dominion had spent weeks reviewing human military assessments of Confederation defenses. Fleet Admiral Haxran of the Stellar Commerce Guild had watched humans revolutionize 3 different industries in 6 months. Prime researcher Yilketh of the Scientific Consortium had seen humans make theoretical breakthroughs that should have taken decades. They're not just another member species, continued High Regent Velthara. They're a fundamental threat to the established order. In 18 months, they've identified vulnerabilities in our military doctrines that we've overlooked for centuries. They've developed technologies that render our advantages obsolete, and they've done it all while maintaining perfect diplomatic facades. Fleet Admiral Haxran leaned forward, his cybernetic implants glowing softly in the chamber's dim light. The economic projections are equally disturbing. Human manufacturing efficiency has increased productivity in their assigned sectors by 400%. Their logistics innovations have reduced shipping costs across 6 major trade routes. If these trends continue, they'll control 30% of galactic commerce within a decade. Without firing a single shot, General Torvex added grimly, "They're conquering us through competence." Prime researcher Yilketh activated a holographic display showing human scientific achievements. My lords, they've made breakthrough discoveries in 14 different fields since joining the Confederation. Breakthrough discoveries that our scientists have been working toward for generations. They're not just learning our science, they're surpassing it. The display showed human improvements to faster-than-light travel, energy weapon efficiency, and shield technology. Each advancement was significant enough to shift the balance of power between species. More concerning, the Prime researcher continued, is their approach to scientific research. Other species specialize in narrow fields and advance slowly through careful study. Humans treat all knowledge as interconnected and advance on multiple fronts simultaneously. They're solving problems we didn't know we had. High Regent Velthara stood and walked to the chamber's single window, looking out at the barren landscape of Keth Prime. The fundamental issue is that humans don't understand their proper place in galactic society. They behave as if they expect to be equal partners with species that have had spaceflight for millennia. Worse, General Torvex interjected, they behave as if they expect to surpass us. The statement hung in the air like a challenge. For 800 years, the established galactic powers had maintained their positions through careful balance and mutual respect. Each species had their role, their specializations, their accepted limitations. Humans were disrupting that balance by refusing to accept any limitations at all. Fleet Admiral Haxran brought up economic projections that painted a disturbing picture. At current rates of advancement, humans will achieve technological parity with the most advanced Confederation species within 2 decades, economic dominance within 3 decades, and military superiority. He paused meaningfully. Military superiority could happen much sooner if they decide they need it. Are we suggesting that humans have aggressive intentions? Asked Prime Researcher Yilketh. We're suggesting that human intentions are irrelevant, High Regent Velthara replied. Their capabilities are what matter. A species that can revolutionize multiple fields simultaneously, that can outthink our best military strategists, and that approaches every challenge with the assumption that they'll overcome it is inherently destabilizing. She turned back to face the group. Consider this, every other species in the galaxy has natural limitations that keep them in balance with the rest of galactic society. The Vorthan Empire excels at administration but lacks innovation. The Keth Dominion dominates military doctrine but struggles with technological advancement. The Scientific Consortium leads in research but has no practical application capabilities. Humans, she continued, appear to have no such limitations. They excel at everything they attempt and improve everything they touch. That's not diversity, that's dominance. General Torvex accessed his own intelligence files. My sources within Earth's military command have identified disturbing trends in their strategic planning. They're not just preparing for potential conflicts, they're preparing to win them decisively. Their war games assume victory not through negotiation or tactical advantage, but through complete elimination of threats.
Explain, Fleet Admiral Haxron demanded. Human military doctrine doesn't include exit strategies or limited engagement protocols. Every scenario they've wargamed ends with either total victory or total defeat. They don't plan for stalemates, truces, or negotiated settlements. They plan to fight until the enemy surrenders unconditionally or ceases to exist. Prime Researcher Yilketh looked disturbed. That's not sustainable military thinking. Every species requires limitations to prevent conflicts from escalating beyond control. Every species except humans, apparently, General Torvex replied. Their historical records show consistent patterns of escalation until one side achieves complete victory. They've never fought a war that ended in compromise. High Regent Valthara returned to her seat, her decision clearly made. My lords, we face a choice that will define the next millennium of galactic history. We can allow humanity to continue their unrestricted advancement until they inevitably dominate galactic civilization. Or we can act now, while we still possess superior force. You're proposing military action against a member species, Fleet Admiral Haxron said carefully. That's unprecedented. This entire situation is unprecedented, the High Regent replied. Humans have forced us into uncharted territory. We must respond accordingly. General Torvex was already running tactical assessments. A direct assault on Earth would be challenging. Human defensive preparations have been extensive since joining the Confederation. They've fortified their system with weapons platforms that incorporate improvements to our own designs. More concerning, they've developed defensive strategies that assume attackers will use Confederation standard tactics. Meaning?
Meaning they've spent 18 months preparing specifically for the possibility that we might attack them.
Their entire defense grid is designed to counter Confederation military doctrine. The implications were chilling. Humans hadn't just prepared for unknown threats, they prepared for the possibility that their new allies might become enemies. Prime Researcher Yilketh accessed human research databases through official channels. My lords, this goes deeper than military preparation. Humans have been systematically studying every aspect of Confederation society since first contact. Not just technology and military capabilities, but political structures, economic dependencies, and social weaknesses. They've been planning for this conversation, Fleet Admiral Haxron realized. High Regent Valthara nodded grimly. Which brings us to our fundamental choice. We can continue to pretend that humans are just another member species while they systematically surpass us in every field, or we can acknowledge that they represent an existential threat to the established order. What exactly are you proposing? General Torvex asked. Preemptive action. A surgical strike to eliminate human military capabilities before they become too advanced to counter. We frame it as a police action to prevent a rogue species from destabilizing galactic peace. And if we fail? Prime Researcher Yilketh asked quietly. High Regent Valthara's answer was brutally honest. If we fail, my lords, then we discover just how dangerous humans can be when they decide we're enemies instead of allies. The vote, when it came, was unanimous. Not because all 5 leaders believed it was the right choice, but because none of them could accept the alternative of human dominance. Fleet Admiral Haxron was tasked with assembling a coalition fleet large enough to overwhelm Earth's defenses quickly. The plan called for simultaneous strikes on human military installations, communication networks, and industrial facilities. Complete victory within 72 hours. Before humans could mount an effective response. General Torvex would provide tactical expertise and ensure that Confederation military doctrine was adapted to counter known human defensive strategies. The attack would use overwhelming force applied with precision timing to prevent human forces from implementing their concerning ability to fight beyond normal limitations. Prime Researcher Yilketh would develop countermeasures for human technological advantages, ensuring that their improved weapons and defensive systems could be neutralized quickly. The operation was designated Stable Foundation and given absolute priority. Within 6 months, the largest military force in galactic history would be assembled and deployed against a single world. As the hegemony leaders departed Keth Prime, each carried the same unspoken thought. They were either about to save galactic civilization from an unprecedented threat, or they were about to learn why humans had never lost a war they were determined to win. High Regent Valthara's final words to the group would be remembered by the survivors of what came next. My lords, we are about to discover whether humans are as dangerous as we suspect. For the sake of galactic stability, let us hope they are not. The irony of that statement would become apparent only after it was far too late to change course. The hegemony had made their decision based on fear of human capabilities in peace. They were about to discover what human capabilities looked like in war, and war, as humanity had learned through millennia of bloody experience, was where they truly excelled. The attack on Earth began at 0347 hours, Galactic Standard Time, with simultaneous strikes on 12 major targets across the Sol system. The Confederation fleet, composed of over 800 ships from 17 different species, dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation. Admiral Corrin, commanding from the flagship Eternal Justice, had planned the operation down to the smallest detail. It should have been over in 6 hours. The first indication that something was wrong came when Earth's defense platforms began firing before the Confederation ships had finished their hyperspace translations. Somehow, impossibly, the humans had detected the incoming fleet and calculated their arrival coordinates with impossible precision. How? Admiral Corrin demanded as his tactical display lit up with incoming fire. How did they know we were coming? His communications officer, a young Vorthan named Kexera, frantically scanned through intelligence reports. Sir, human deep space monitoring stations have been tracking our fleet movements for the past 3 weeks. They appear to have predicted our attack vectors based on our previous military exercises. The Admiral stared at his displays in disbelief. Humans had not only anticipated the attack, they had used Confederation training exercises to predict exactly how that attack would unfold. Commander Helnix, the fleet's tactical analyst, was updating threat assessments in real time. Admiral, human defensive positions don't match our intelligence reports. They've completely restructured their defense grid since our last reconnaissance. When? Based on energy signature analysis approximately 72 hours ago. They rebuilt their entire defensive infrastructure in 3 days. Admiral Corrin felt a cold knot forming in his stomach. That's impossible! Defense platforms require weeks to construct and install. Sir, interrupted the communications officer. I'm receiving a transmission from Earth Command. They're broadcasting on an open channel. Put it through. The voice that filled the bridge belonged to Admiral Sarah Chen, now commanding officer of Earth Defense Force. Her tone was calm, professional, and utterly confident. Confederation Fleet, this is Admiral Chen of Earth Defense Command. You are hereby ordered to withdraw from Sol System immediately or face destruction. You have exactly 10 minutes to begin retreat maneuvers. Admiral Corrin activated his own communications. Admiral Chen, I am Admiral Corrin of the Confederation Enforcement Fleet. You are outgunned 800 to 1. Surrender immediately and your casualties will be minimized. Chen's response came without hesitation. Admiral, you seem to be operating under the assumption that this is a numbers game. Let me correct that misunderstanding. The human defense platforms opened fire. What happened next would be studied in military academies for generations, assuming there were any academies left to study it. Human weapons fired with accuracy that defied physics, striking Confederation ships at ranges that should have been impossible. More disturbing, the weapons appeared to be specifically designed to counter Confederation defensive systems. Admiral! Commander Helnix shouted over the chaos. Their weapons are penetrating our shields like they don't exist. How is that possible? Sir, these aren't the weapons we encountered during joint training exercises. These are completely new designs, and they're specifically calibrated to our shield frequencies. Admiral Corrin watched in horror as 3 heavy cruisers simply ceased to exist, vaporized by human weapons that should not have been able to penetrate Confederation armor. All ships, evasive maneuvers. Implement Tactical Doctrine 77 Alpha. The Confederation fleet scattered into predetermined attack formations, executing maneuvers that had been practiced for decades. The response should have confused and overwhelmed human defenders. Instead, human weapons began targeting ships before they reached their new positions. They're predicting our movements, Commander Helnix reported in disbelief. Every evasive maneuver we attempt, they're already targeting where we're going to be. Admiral Chen's voice came through the communications again. Admiral Corrin, you're executing Tactical Doctrine 77 Alpha. We have counters prepared for Doctrine 77 Alpha through 77 Zeta. Would you like to try 77 Beta next, or shall we skip to something more interesting? The realization hit Admiral Corrin like a physical blow. Humans hadn't just prepared for a Confederation attack, they had prepared for every possible Confederation attack. Every tactical doctrine, every strategic maneuver, every contingency plan in the Confederation military database had been analyzed and counted. Sir, Commander Helnix reported grimly, we've lost 37 ships in the first engagement. Human losses are 0. Admiral Corrin stared at his tactical displays, trying to comprehend how an advanced galactic fleet could suffer losses while the enemy remained untouched.
What about their defense platforms? Surely we've damaged their installations? Sir, human defense platforms appear to be constructed with self-repair capabilities.
Damaged sections are being rebuilt in real time. The second phase of the attack was supposed to involve close-range combat where superior Confederation numbers would overwhelm human defenses. The human response was swift and decisive. Earth's orbital shipyards, which intelligence had reported as minimal defensive assets, suddenly came online as massive weapon platforms. Ships that had been listed as under construction in Confederation databases proved to be fully operational vessels that had been disguised as industrial equipment. Admiral, Communications Officer Kexra called out, her voice tight with fear. I'm detecting additional human ships approaching from the outer system. Multiple squadrons moving at impossible velocities. Admiral Corrin checked his tactical displays and felt his blood freeze. Those aren't ships. Those are missiles. The human missile swarm approached at velocities that should have rendered them uncontrollable. Each missile was the size of a small fighter but carried the destructive potential of a heavy cruiser's main gun. More importantly, they moved with coordinated intelligence that suggested advanced AI guidance systems. Implement point defense protocols, Admiral Corrin ordered. All ships, full defensive fire. Confederation point defense systems, pride of galactic military engineering, managed to intercept approximately 30% of the incoming missiles. The remaining 70% struck with devastating precision, each missile targeting critical system vulnerabilities that should have been impossible to identify at such ranges. Admiral, Commander Helnix reported, her voice now openly frightened. The missiles are learning from our defensive patterns. Each wave is more effective than the last. Admiral Chen's voice cut through the chaos again. Admiral Corrin, you've now experienced human defensive doctrine. Would you like to experience human offensive doctrine, or are you ready to discuss withdrawal? Admiral Corrin's tactical training told him to press the attack. 800 ships could overwhelm any defense through sheer weight of firepower. His survival instincts told him to run. All ships full assault. Target their industrial facilities and population centers. Force them to defend multiple objectives. The Confederation fleet opened fire with everything they had. Energy beams, kinetic projectiles, and plasma charges filled space between the fleet and Earth's defenses. It was enough firepower to glass a planet. None of it reached Earth. Human point defense systems intercepted incoming fire with efficiency that bordered on the supernatural. Energy beams were deflected by gravitational distortions, kinetic projectiles were vaporized by precision laser arrays, and plasma charges were dissipated by electromagnetic fields that shouldn't have been possible with known technology. Sir, Commander Helnix whispered, they're not just defending, they're demonstrating. Admiral Corrin understood what she meant. Humans weren't struggling to defend Earth, they were showing the Confederation fleet exactly how outclassed they were. Every defensive measure was executed with casual precision that made it clear they could have done much more if necessary. Admiral Corrin. Admiral Chen's voice carried a note of almost maternal patience. You've now seen what happens when you attack our home. Your fleet has been reduced by 40% without inflicting any meaningful damage on our defenses. I'm going to give you one final opportunity to withdraw before we demonstrate what human offensive capabilities look like. The threat, in her words, was unmistakable. Everything the Confederation fleet had experienced so far was purely defensive. Humans hadn't actually attacked yet. Admiral Corrin looked at his tactical displays, saw the wreckage of over 300 ships, and realized that he was about to make the most important decision of his career. He could continue the attack and discover what human offensive capabilities meant, or he could retreat and face the consequences of military failure. Admiral Chen, he replied heavily, what are your terms for withdrawal? Simple. Your fleet leaves Sol System immediately and never returns. In exchange, we won't follow you home. The casual mention of following the Confederation fleet home sent chills through every bridge officer. Humans weren't just defending their territory, they were implying they could carry the fight to Confederation worlds. You're threatening to attack Confederation space? Admiral Chen's response was matter-of-fact. Admiral, we're not threatening anything, we're explaining consequences. You attacked our home based on the assumption that we were too dangerous to be your allies. We're demonstrating that you are absolutely correct about the dangerous part. Admiral Corrin found himself asking the question that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Admiral Chen, what exactly are human offensive capabilities? The pause that followed seemed to last forever. Admiral, Chen finally replied, you really don't want to find out.
But if you insist on continuing this attack, you'll discover that everything you've seen so far was us being polite. 2. The remaining Confederation ships began withdrawing from Sol System without waiting for Admiral Corrin's orders.
His crew had heard the tone in Admiral Chen's voice, and none of them wanted to discover what human politeness looked like compared to human seriousness.
As the Eternal Justice prepared for hyperspace translation, Admiral Corrin made one final transmission. Admiral Chen, this engagement is concluded, but the Confederation cannot allow the threat you represent to continue unchecked. Chen's final response would be recorded and analyzed by xenopsychologists across the galaxy. Admiral Corrin, you seem to be confused about something. We're not the threat, we're the response to threats. You made yourselves the threat when you decided to attack us. The difference, she continued, is that threats can be eliminated. Responses are permanent. As the Confederation fleet fled Sol System, every surviving ship carried the same message. Humanity had not been conquered. Humanity had not been defeated. Humanity had been inconvenienced, and they had responded to that inconvenience by demonstrating that 800 ships couldn't scratch their defenses. Admiral Corrin's final report to Confederation Command contained a single recommendation. Do not engage humans in combat under any circumstances. They are not warriors. They are not soldiers. They are something entirely more dangerous. They are problem solvers, and they have identified us as a problem. The war between humanity and the Galactic Confederation had lasted 6 hours. The consequences would last forever. 3 months after what historians would call the 6-hour war, the Galactic Confederation Council convened an emergency session on Nexus Prime. The agenda was simple: how to respond to humanity's ultimatum. Chancellor Vexra, her crystalline form flickering with stress patterns that hadn't been seen in centuries, read the human demands aloud to the assembled representatives of 43 species. First, immediate dissolution of the hegemony and public disclosure of their decision to attack Earth. Second, reparations to be paid to humanity in the form of technology transfers and territorial concessions. Third, complete restructuring of Confederation military command under human oversight. The silence that followed was deafening. Fourth, the Chancellor continued. Establishment of new protocols for conflict resolution that prioritize negotiation over force. And fifth, she paused, her form flickering more rapidly. Complete access to all Confederation databases, including military, scientific, and political records. Ambassador Yilnith of the Peaceful Assembly finally spoke. They're demanding surrender terms. No, corrected Admiral Corrin from his position at the military advisory table. They're demanding management terms. They're not trying to conquer us. They're trying to fix us. General Krekstar of the Moloch warrior clans stood slowly, his massive frame casting shadows across the chamber. Admiral, with respect, the distinction may be irrelevant. Human military forces have been active since the engagement at Sol. He activated a holographic display showing fleet movements across Confederation space. Human ships have been conducting welfare checks on every major military installation in the galaxy. They appear at will, scan our facilities, and depart without explanation. Our defense grids detect them approximately 30% of the time. They're demonstrating that they can reach any target in Confederation space without opposition, Admiral Corrin added grimly.
Every world, every military base, every government facility.
They've made it clear that distance and defenses are irrelevant to their capabilities. Chancellor Vexra brought up intelligence reports that made several ambassadors gasp. Human technological advancement since the Sol engagement has been unprecedented. They appear to have reverse-engineered every weapon system we used against them, and improved upon the designs. Dr. Henry, the Confederation's chief xenobiologist, stood to deliver her analysis. My lords, human development patterns have fundamentally changed since the attack on Sol. Before the engagement, they were advancing rapidly, but along predictable scientific progressions. Since the attack, they're advancing in ways that defy conventional research methodology. She activated her own display showing human technological developments. They've developed faster-than-light communication systems that surpass our best technology by several generations. Their weapons now operate on principles that our scientists are still trying to understand. Most disturbing, they've begun producing technology that we can't even scan properly. Explain, demanded General Krekstar. Human ships now mount defensive systems that our sensors cannot penetrate. When we attempt to scan their vessels, our equipment simply stops working. Not blocked, not jammed, stopped. As if the technology itself refuses to function in the presence of human defensive fields. Ambassador Lorth of the Peaceful Assembly raised a tentacle nervously. Dr. Henry, Are you suggesting that humans have developed technology that can disable our technology? I'm suggesting that humans have developed technology that makes our technology irrelevant, she replied. They're not jamming our senses, they're operating beyond our ability to perceive them. Fleet Admiral Haxran, one of the few surviving hegemony leaders, accessed classified intelligence files. My lords, the situation is more complex than technological advancement. Human behavior patterns have also fundamentally changed. He displayed surveillance data from human colonies and installations. Before the Sol engagement, humans exhibited normal social and industrial patterns. Since the attack, they've reorganized their entire civilization around a single priority, ensuring that no one can threaten them again. The images showed human industrial facilities that had been converted to weapons production, civilian populations undergoing military training, and research facilities working on projects that defied classification. They're not preparing for another attack, Fleet Admiral Haxran continued. They're preparing to prevent anyone from ever being capable of attacking them. They're systematically identifying and neutralizing potential threats before those threats can develop. Chancellor Vextra brought up the most disturbing intelligence report of all. My lords, human diplomatic contacts have begun approaching individual member species with separate agreements. They're bypassing Confederation authority and establishing direct relationships with our member worlds. What kind of agreements? Asked Ambassador Yilnath. Protection agreements, Admiral Corrin answered heavily. They're offering to defend individual species against external threats in exchange for cooperation and technology sharing. 7 species have already signed bilateral defense treaties with Earth. The implications were staggering. Humans weren't trying to conquer the Confederation. They were making it irrelevant by replacing it with direct relationships. General Krekstar reviewed his own intelligence reports. My lords, human military advisors have begun appearing on worlds that have signed these bilateral treaties. They claim to be providing defensive consultation, but their activities suggest they're establishing forward operating bases. Are they militarizing our member species? Chancellor Vextra asked her. They're doing something worse, the general replied. They're teaching them to think like humans. Species that have worked with human military advisors have begun asking questions about their own defensive capabilities, challenging established military doctrines, and developing contingency plans for threats that don't currently exist. Dr. Helmry added her own disturbing observations. The psychological impact of human contact appears to be infectious. Species that interact closely with humans begin adopting human approaches to problem solving. They become more proactive, more analytically rigorous, and more willing to challenge established assumptions. They're changing us, Ambassador Yilnath realized. That's the point, Admiral Corrin replied. Humans have identified the root cause of the threat to their security, the political and military structures that allowed the hegemony to make the decision to attack Earth. They're systematically replacing those structures with alternatives that they consider more stable. Chancellor Vextra's form flickered with what could only be described as despair. What are our options? The question hung in the air for several long moments before Admiral Corrin answered. Chancellor, I've spent months analyzing human capabilities and intentions. In my professional opinion, we have exactly 2 options. We can cooperate with their restructuring of galactic society, or we can wait for them to implement that restructuring without our input. Are you suggesting surrender? I'm suggesting adaptation, the Admiral replied. Humans have demonstrated that they can eliminate any threat to their security. They've also demonstrated that they prefer cooperation to conquest. They're offering us the opportunity to be part of the solution rather than part of the problem. General Krekstar stood again, his warrior's pride clearly struggling with pragmatic reality. My lords, I have commanded armies for 4 decades. I have never encountered an enemy that couldn't be defeated through superior tactics, technology, or courage. Humans are not an enemy that can be defeated. They're a force of nature that can only be accommodated. Fleet Admiral Haxran accessed the final intelligence report that would seal the Confederation's fate. My lords, I must inform you that human diplomatic representatives are requesting a meeting to discuss the implementation of their ultimatum. They're not demanding immediate compliance. They're offering to negotiate the details. Where? Asked Chancellor Vextra. Here, on Nexus Prime. They're requesting permission to land a single diplomatic shuttle with a negotiation team of 5 representatives. The parallel to humanity's first contact protocols was unmistakable. Once again, humans were dictating terms while maintaining the appearance of requesting permission. Ambassador Yilnath spoke what everyone was thinking. What happens if we refuse? Admiral Corrin's answer was brutally honest. Ambassador, human fleets have already demonstrated that they can appear at any location in Confederation space without warning. They're requesting permission to land a diplomatic shuttle, but I suspect they're capable of doing so regardless of our response. Then why request permission at all? Because, Admiral Corrin replied with growing understanding, they're still trying to maintain the illusion that we have choices. They're offering us the dignity of negotiating our own surrender rather than simply imposing their will. The vote, when it came, was unanimous. Not because the Confederation Council wanted to negotiate with humanity, but because they had finally understood that cooperation was the only option that allowed them to maintain any semblance of autonomy. The human diplomatic team that arrived on Nexus Prime 3 days later consisted of exactly 5 people, just as they had specified during first contact. The team was led by Ambassador Sarah Chen, former Admiral of Earth Defense Forces, now serving as humanity's chief diplomatic representative. Her opening statement to the Confederation Council would be quoted in political science textbooks for generations. My lords, we're here to discuss the transition to a more stable galactic order. We're not interested in ruling over you, but we are absolutely committed to ensuring that no one rules over us. The choice you face is simple. You can help us build a galaxy where conflicts are resolved through cooperation rather than force, or you can step aside while we build it ourselves. The outcome, she continued, is not negotiable. The methods are. As the negotiations began, one fact became increasingly clear to every member of the Confederation Council. Humanity had not won a war against galactic civilization. They had diagnosed a fundamental flaw in galactic civilization and were implementing a cure. Whether the patient survived the treatment would depend entirely on how well they adapted to humanity's prescription for peace. Overwhelming defensive capability combined with absolute intolerance for aggression. 6 months later, the Galactic Confederation was formally dissolved and replaced with the Galactic Cooperative, a loose alliance of independent species bound together by mutual defense treaties and coordinated through human-designed diplomatic protocols. The new galactic order had exactly one rule. No species would ever again possess the capability to threaten another species' extinction. Humans had appointed themselves as both the enforcers and the guarantors of that rule, and as the years passed and galactic civilization adapted to its new reality, most species came to realize that humanity had given them something they had never possessed before: genuine peace. Not the fragile balance of competing powers that had characterized the old Confederation, but true peace backed by the absolute certainty that any threat to galactic stability would be identified and neutralized before it could cause harm. The price of that peace was simple. No species could ever again be more dangerous than humanity was willing to allow. It was a price that most found surprisingly easy to pay, especially once they realized that humanity's definition of too dangerous was remarkably generous. Humans didn't object to other species being powerful, advanced, or militarily capable. They objected to other species being genocidal, expansionist, or aggressive toward innocent populations. As Ambassador Chen had explained to the final Confederation Council session, we're not trying to keep you weak. We're trying to keep you sane. The galaxy has room for countless different approaches to civilization. It doesn't have room for approaches that involve eliminating other civilizations. And so the galaxy learned to live with humanity's protection, gradually forgetting that it had ever been a protection they didn't want to need. The humans, for their part, settled into their role as galactic peacekeepers, with the same methodical efficiency they applied to everything else. They established monitoring networks that could detect developing threats decades before they became dangerous. They created intervention protocols that could resolve conflicts before they escalated to violence. And they maintained defensive capabilities so overwhelming that the very idea of galactic war became obsolete. Most importantly, they never let anyone forget why all of these precautions were necessary. In archives on Earth and throughout human space, detailed records were kept of the species that had once decided humans were too dangerous to be allies. Those records served as a permanent reminder of humanity's fundamental approach to galactic relations. We prefer to be your friends, but we're prepared to be your problem solvers. The choice, as always, belonged to everyone else.